All right, welcome. So this video is why addiction makes you depressed, right? So this video is just going to cover why when you are in a state of addiction, you will inevitably, eventually become depressed, if not already, right? And if you are already even just slightly depressed, right, this will continue to progress over time. So without further ado, let's just get into the video. When I was younger, I was addicted to, all of the normal addictions, right? I was a video gamer when I was like 10, and then I eventually quit that when I was 13 to start hitting the gym and working out. But then, from there, other addictions took hold, right? Social media was a big one. Everybody was on TikTok, and I always clowned my friends who would watch TikTok until I ended up downloading it, right? And then I started using it because, well, they're just sitting around on TikTok, so I might as well do the same because, sitting here doing nothing isn't very fun. And that's what my friends were doing, was just sitting around on their phones and watching TikTok. So I ended up getting into it as well. And then eventually that took a hold on me, right? When I was trying to get more productive in my life, that was one of the distractions, one of the outs that I had, right? Another addiction of mine was weed, smoking weed. So these are all examples of things that I was addicted to in the past. But what I noticed was every time these addictions were consistent, right? Every time there was a period where those addictions were the main thing that I did for the day, or the main thing that I thought about, and the main thing I focused on, right? It was very consistent that my mental health would also drop in accordance to how much I was using these different types of stimuli, right? So any form of overstimulation is going to deplete dopamine, which inevitably will make you feel slightly less motivated and just slightly worse in general. But there are also a couple of reasons why specifically being addicted to something can actually make you depressed, right? Can actually cause you to enter a state of depression. So for me, when I was younger, I was about 15. I was working towards becoming a professional snowboarder, and I was trying to start building a business. I wouldn't say that I was very successful, but I was at least working towards that, right? That was an aspiration of mine. And one of the reasons I wasn't successful, well, the main reason I wasn't successful was because of these addictions that I had. And not just the addictions themselves, but the mental state that they had caused for me, right? So the mental state that I was living in as a result of these addictions made it near impossible to really put forth any meaningful effort towards any meaningful goals, right? So before we get into the actual video, if you guys would like to work with me directly, one-on-one, to completely transform your lives through self-improvement, I'm running a new program where I will take a client one-on-one, and I will essentially take your goals and create a structure, a protocol for you to go from where you are now to achieving that goal or progressing rapidly towards that goal, right? So if it's a bigger goal, I can't promise you'll achieve it, but I can promise that you will make progress towards that goal, and I will teach you all of the skills and all of the tools necessary for you to take it all the way, right? So if that's something you're interested in, you can go down to the link in the description. That'll take you to my Instagram, and you can send me a DM there. Anyways, so this is how addiction makes you depressed. The first reason that I have here is a lack of purpose, right? So when you are addicted to something, that thing essentially takes the place of your purpose. The reason you would look for a drug, or the reason you would drink, or the reason you would go and scroll on social media aimlessly is because you are drifting, right? Is because you lack purpose, you lack intentionality behind the actions that you're taking. So if you have a purpose and you're working on it, and then you have a period of the day with no purpose, this will cause you to then drift, right? And drifting is the state in which your brain is looking for something to do, right? It is looking for something to stimulate itself. Now, most of the time, if we are in this state of drifting and we don't have a purpose, right? We don't have a reason for doing something intentional, we will typically drift to something that is considered pleasurable, right? Something that is an easy dopamine hit, instant gratification. But this goes beyond like life's purpose, right? Even just the periods of the day, right? So the purpose of my morning routine is to get into flow state. The purpose of my morning deep work block is to complete the most important tasks. Then the purpose of my training block is to work on and develop my skills as an athlete. Then there's also a block at the end of the day, right? The purpose of the end of my day is to reset, rest, and recover, right? So the purpose of the end of my day is to then transition into the next day and recover from the previous day, right? But if I went through each of these blocks and then I got home and I had nothing to do, no intention, no purpose, right? It is very easy for me to then drift towards social media, right? I'll end up watching some random YouTube videos because I don't really watch TikTok anymore. I'll end up on YouTube, right? Or, whatever. In the past, after I'd get home from school, there would be no intention, no purpose for that block of time, and I'd end up normally smoking weed, right? When you lack a purpose, it makes it easy to drift into these addictions. But the other thing is, anything you are doing that is lacking intentionality, that is lacking purpose, will cause your mental health to go down, right? Because being aimless, right, drifting, is a state that is non-optimal for the human condition, right? So human beings are most happy and most fulfilled when they are purposeful, when they are driven, when everything they are doing has an intention behind it, right? When you don't have this purpose, right? When you are just drifting, when you are just allowing whatever happens to happen, your mental health will slowly deteriorate due to the fact that your brain wants something to work on. Your brain wants something to work towards. Your brain wants an intention. It wants to set an intention and it wants to follow through on that intention, right? So a lack of purpose will actually make you depressed, and being addicted to whatever it is, right? Drugs, alcohol, sex even. Many people are addicted to sex, and junk food, social media. When you are addicted and when you are in this state of overindulgence, when you are constantly going after this thing that you are addicted to, right? It becomes your purpose. And so you are now lacking a true purpose in life, right? And that lack of a true purpose will cause you to become depressed over time. The next thing is a temporary gain for a long-term loss. So one of the reasons you're becoming depressed is because that is the cost of the drug, or that is the cost of the social media or the form of instant gratification that you've chosen, right? The cost of that instant gratification is tomorrow's happiness, is tomorrow's satisfaction, right? So yes, you can feel this increase in dopamine and pleasure now, but the cost of that is going to be your happiness and your fulfillment and your mental state in the future, right? So when you are addicted, you're constantly taking that energy from your future self, right? And so as time goes on, as you progress in this, you become more and more depressed because that is the cost of what you are doing, right? That is the cost of the addiction you're indulging, is the depression that comes on as a result. So think about this the next time you want to give in. If it's junk food and sugar, it will taste good now, but it will cost your body the energy required to work out or to just feel good in general tomorrow, right? If you want to scroll on social media, know that it will entertain you now, but everything else you do moving forward will feel a little bit duller, right? It will feel a little bit more boring. So that's the cost, right? That's what you are paying. That's the price you're paying for the addiction, right? You can have the pleasure now, but it will cost you pleasure in the future. It will cost you your baseline state of dopamine, and therefore you will feel a lower threshold of pleasure, right? No matter what you're doing. And this includes the drug itself. So if you're smoking weed, you can smoke weed today, but everybody who is a consistent smoker knows about tolerance. Tolerance develops very quickly, right? Tolerance will develop if you are consistently smoking. Why? Because the pleasure, right, is decreasing over time. I mean, yes, your brain adapts and you become less sensitive, but also in general, the amount of pleasure you receive from the activity decreases as a result, as a cost of you already having used the substance, right? So when you use the substance once, it will cost you the amount of pleasure that you can receive the next time. And the next thing is going back on your word, right? So when you are addicted to something, specifically when you're addicted and you're trying to quit, if you're constantly saying, I want to quit, I'm going to be done, right? I'm going to leave this substance in the past. I'm going to leave this addiction in the past. But then you constantly go back, right? Constantly go back on that word, go back on that intention. This confuses your brain. And it also, as we were talking about before, your brain wants to set an intention and follow through. When you set an intention and revert, do not follow through, but revert, this will cause your brain to then kind of panic, right? Your brain will start to no longer trust itself. It will no longer trust you. And slowly over time, you will develop this state of non-belief in yourself, right? And this state is akin to depression, right? When you don't have belief in yourself, you naturally will become more sluggish. You naturally will become less intentional, right? You naturally will start to drift easier and drift more. And as I said before, this drifting state will cause you to feel like you are depressed, right? And so when you are telling your brain that you cannot follow through on the things that you say, that is why you become depressed, right? Your brain is like, well, shit, I wanted to do this thing and I said I was going to do this thing, but I can't, right? Even if you could, but you chose not to, your brain believes, oh shit, I can't, I'm not capable. And so it then conditions itself to no longer set these big intentions, right? You don't want to set big goals because you're scared of disappointing yourself, right? Because you don't actually believe you can follow through. Whereas the reverse is true. If you set intentions and you follow through on them, no matter how small, this will develop over time a belief within your brain that when you set an intention, you will go ahead and achieve it. And the last thing is self-destruction. So when you are addicted to something, when it is specifically something that is detrimental to your body, so junk food, actually, technically all of the addictions that I'm mentioning are detrimental to your health in one shape or another, or one form or another, right? So you are constantly taking action against yourself, right? You are constantly doing something that is actually self-destructive, right? So when you actively do an activity that is going to harm you in some way, shape, or form, you condition yourself to think that this is what you deserve, right? This is how you should live, right? And so you get used to feeling lesser, right? You get used to feeling as though you deserve the pain that you're going through, or that something about self-destruction, something about causing harm to your body is actually pleasurable, or is actually enjoyable, or is purposeful, right? You no longer associate a positive outcome from doing something that is actually good for you, right? And so how do we actually break the loop? The first thing is you have to rebuild your mindset, right? So the first step is to start rebuilding your mindset. You have to work here before you can work here and out here, right? This is where it all starts, is in the mind. So if you can master the mindset, if you can master the mental portion, everything else falls in line. Everything else becomes easy, right? So what does this mean? Rewire your mindset from self-destruction to growth, right? You want a growth mindset. You want a developmental mindset, right? You want to believe in continuously making improvements in your life, improvements to yourself, right? Making yourself healthier, smarter, stronger, more wealthy, right? Doing these things to build yourself up is the positive thing, right? This is the thing that you should associate pleasure with, right? You currently associate pleasure with the self-destructive activities. So now you reprogram yourself to associate pleasure with the difficult activities that result in more health and longevity over time. So the next thing is to build discipline and willpower in smaller areas, right? So what this means is essentially if you cannot go after your big goals, right? If you cannot start the deep work block, if you cannot go to the gym consistently yet, build discipline and willpower in smaller areas, right? So it's the same thing with the big addiction. If you can't quit the big addiction yet, right, remove some of the smaller ones that are less important to you, that are easier to quit, but that are still detrimental in order to develop willpower in those areas. And over time, as you do this, it will get easier and easier to develop discipline and willpower in the big areas, the important areas, right? So one example I say for people in a rut is start with your room, right? Cleaning your room is a very simple activity for most, but it is still a disciplined activity, right? It is still something that requires you to act even when you don't feel as though action is what you want to do, right? So build discipline in these smaller areas, right? Start by cleaning your room, do your laundry, right? Make your bed in the morning. Small things like this, simple things like this will slowly develop your mindset, slowly develop your beliefs to see that, okay, I am productive, I am consistent, I am disciplined, I have the willpower to remove things that aren't serving me, right? I don't need these addictions, I don't need these drugs, I don't need this stimulus, right? Now, the next thing is to build better habits and a productive routine, right? So focus on building habits that are positive, right? So let's say you want to be an athlete or you want to get healthier in general, more fit. Start consistently going to the gym, even without worrying about the addictions themselves, right? Start just going to the gym. Block out a time of day where you can get off your phone and stop scrolling and go to the gym, right? Develop healthy habits so that when you do quit, you have something to fall back on. And then over time, the goal is to develop this into a full routine. Have an entire day full of habits that are positive, right? And that creates a routine. And so when you have a full routine that is positive, it makes it easier to leave behind the addictions that only really come in when you are drifting, right? When you don't have anything intentional to work towards. And the last thing is to just quit, right? You have to drop the addiction at some point or another. And this will be difficult no matter when you do it, right? I say it is easier to do it now than it is to wait. But if there are steps, as I just mentioned before, that you need to put in place before you can quit, do that. But actively do those things. And then eventually it will come a time, you will not feel ready, but eventually it will come a time where the next step, the only next step, is to drop the addiction and push through that pain and push through that discomfort. And so if that's where you're at now, the best thing you can do is just quit and push through those withdrawals, right? Make it through. And the way you do this is by falling back on these new habits we've developed, the new routine we've developed, right? Fall back on the willpower that you've built up within your mind by doing these smaller things. And use this mindset as a foundational piece to keep you centered, keep you focused on where you actually would like to go. Just a few tips for recovery while you're going through this period of time. One is meditation and breath work. So meditation is going to help you a lot, right? It is going to be how you will actively deprogram and reprogram these conditions within yourself, right? So you are conditioned to consistently act on your addiction, right? If you're addicted to smoking, you are conditioned to smoke every time that you would normally smoke throughout the day. And so if you can become aware of these conditionings, you can actually start to actively reprogram and rewire them. And another thing is breath work. Breath work will actually give you more control over your nervous system, right? And this is beneficial because you can regulate the cravings, right? So when you get these intense cravings, you can regulate your fight or flight response to relax back into the parasympathetic mode, right? I believe it's parasympathetic. There's the difference, parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. One is fight or flight. One is your rest and digest state, right? So you enter a rest and digest state instead of staying in this fight or flight mode, and that can alleviate cravings. When you have a craving, you are in a fight or flight state. This is a stress response, right? And so you can regulate it back to a rest and digest state, which is easier to relax into, and therefore the craving can subside. So breath work will help a lot as well. The next thing is journaling. Journaling will help you to get your thoughts on paper. Journaling will help you to process everything you're going through within the withdrawal phase, right? It will help you to plan for what to do next, and it will help you to reflect on what has already happened, right? And this is very important for you taking your next steps, right? Because you've been in this addiction for so long, you've finally broken out, And so now you take a period of reflection to really look back on what you've been doing and who you really want to become. And then you can then move forward into how you can actually go about doing that. Now, the last thing is exercise and diet, right? If you are consistently exercising, it will make it much easier to quit no matter what the addiction is, right? So if it's weed, if it is social media, whatever, exercise is a good alternative. Exercise can release endorphins, giving you a similar high to smoking, right? So that high state that you crave is really just a relaxed and blissful state. You can attain and achieve this through exercise if you know how, right? So not really if you know how, you could just do it, period, if you exercise consistently enough. It's not really a how, but when you enter a flow state with an exercise, typically you will receive this endorphin boost. And then the last thing is diet. If you have a better diet, if you have a cleaner diet and you feel healthier, you feel more energy, it'll be easier to do more things throughout the day that aren't these easy addictions, right? It'll be easier to not scroll all day because you feel like you have low energy, right? It'll be easier not to smoke weed to feel better because you already feel good, right? You already feel a heightened state of energy. So having a good diet will be a key in order to permanently make these changes. So if you guys would like to work with me directly in order to work through your addictions, or if you just want to optimize your self-improvement in order to make more progress, you can go ahead and DM me on Instagram using the link in the description. But aside from that, that is all for me, and I'm out of here. Peace.